Hello, and welcome to another episode of the GMAT Ninja Data Insight series for the GMAT Focus Edition. I'm Mike Maeda with GMAT Ninja, and today I want to go over a couple key reminders from multi-source reasoning questions. I came up with these reminders after going through all of the multi-source reasoning questions from the latest online question banks on MBA.com. And when I went through those questions, it was about 100 of them. I made quite a few mistakes. I struggled with a bunch of them, and I felt pretty intimidated by multi-source reasoning in particular. So if you're feeling the same way, you're not alone. I'm supposed to be an expert on this stuff. For those of you who don't know me, I've been a tutor with GMAT Ninja since 2016. I've written at least 1,000 or two of the GMAT Ninja posts on GMAT Club, and I have some pretty great GMAT scores under my belt. For example, here's a 790 from my most recent pre-focus edition of the test. Despite all of that, I still had trouble with multi-source reasoning, but thankfully I was able to learn from my mistakes, learn from my struggles, and make a few adjustments that helped me get a 765 on my most recent Focus Edition practice test. Quick note on the score scale here. I only missed one question on the entire practice test. It was in the quant section. That brought me down to an 84 on quant, 765 composite. So the Focus Edition has a updated score scale, and as you can see, it's pretty sensitive once you get into the 700 plus range. Regardless, I was able to get a perfect score on the data insight section, and that wouldn't have been possible without the two reminders that I want to talk about today. Reminder number one, read the questions carefully. So I have the word questions underlined here. Multi-source reasoning, you have a ton of information to get through in the tabs. You spend a lot of time, hopefully invest a good amount of time reading through the information on the tabs, processing that. So once you get to the questions, it's very easy and tempting to skim through those, move as quickly as possible. You're feeling pressed for time. And if you aren't 100% precise with the phrasing of the question, you might miss an important detail that makes all that work you did going through the tabs go right out the window. So even though this sounds obvious, always, always, always take the time to read the questions carefully. Don't skip that part. Okay, reminder number two is to embrace the ambiguity. So several times going through these questions, I thought to myself, this isn't clear. How can I be sure one way or the other? This question isn't fair. The test isn't fair. All these doubts about what I was reading and what the question was actually asking. If that happens to you, it's not surprising for a few reasons. So on multi-source reasoning, you have multiple tabs of information to go through. If you miss some critical detail, that perfectly legitimate question might suddenly feel ambiguous. Also, going back to reminder number one, if you misread the question, your version of the question might be ambiguous, even though the actual question is perfectly fine. Lastly, on multi-source reasoning, most of the questions are not multiple choice. With multiple choice, you have 5 options. You know the right one's in there somewhere. You can use process of elimination. You have a 20% shot of getting it right, even if you don't understand anything. Not so with these conditional statements. You have 3 statements. You have to select yes or no, true or false. You have to make this very binary, stark decision. Your odds of guessing your way through it are very low, and it can be frustrating because sometimes you feel like, man, I knew two of these statements, no problem. Now there's this third one that I'm unsure about. You start second guessing yourself. Things start to feel ambiguous. So lots of legitimate reasons why these questions can feel ambiguous. If it happens to you, you can't waste time and energy fighting with the test. You have to just make the best decision you can and move on. Odds are the problem is with you, not with the question itself. Also, it's an adaptive test, so you don't want to spend all this time fighting with harder questions. That's going to make you rush through questions that are more manageable for you, make you start making careless mistakes, missing easier questions, and that's going to destroy your score. Okay, with that in mind, I want to go through some questions to illustrate how these reminders can help. We're going to go through 3 sets, each with 3 questions, so 9 questions total. I chose these 3 sets in particular because I actually missed several of these questions the first time I went through them. Hopefully after going through this video, you'll be able to improve your performance on multi-source reasoning and on data insights in general. Before I put up the first set of questions, a couple logistical notes on data insights. You have, on average, 2 minutes and 15 seconds per question, so that's 7 minutes per set of 3 multi-source reasoning questions. Make sure that you invest the time going through those tabs before you jump into the first question. So to reinforce that habit, I'm going to put the tabs up first, give you about a minute, minute and a half to go through the tabs. Then I'll pop up the first question, give you another minute and a half for that, and then we'll have a discussion. Obviously, if you need more time, you can always hit the pause button. Lastly, if you're on a phone or a small tablet, I highly recommend that you switch to a computer or something with a larger screen. On the actual test, you'll be able to toggle between the tabs. Obviously, you can't do that watching a video, so I have to put up the tabs all on one screen. It's going to be tough to see on something small like a phone. Okay, so here's the first set of tabs. Again, I'll give you about a minute and a half to go through the tabs. Then I'll put up the question, give you another minute and a half, and then we'll discuss. So off you go. And here's the first question. I'll give you another minute for that. All right, let's jump into the first statement from the first question. Again, if you need more time, just hit the pause button. So our job here is to select yes if the statement accurately reflects the information in the tabs, otherwise select no. I've underlined some key details in this statement. We're talking about the startup phase. Also, we're comparing design 1 to design 2. So really important that we're not comparing generator types. We're not comparing type A to type B directly. As I've highlighted above, design 1 would use a single type A generator. Design 2 uses 3 type B power generators. So we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at the table. In the startup phase, we have kilograms per hour, 744 for type A generators. For type B, it's 203, but since design 2 uses 3 of those, we would have to multiply that by 3 to get 609. 609 is still less than 744, so the answer to the first statement is going to be yes, the design 1 power plant would emit more pollutant Y per hour than would the design 2 power plant. Okay, second statement. This time we're talking about the normal generating phase. So again, 3 type B generators, and we're also asked to compare design 2 to 5% of the emissions from design 1. So first thing we have to do is find 5% of that 218. You could punch it in the calculator, or you could just estimate 218 is about 220. 5% is equal to 5 over 100, which reduces to 1/20th. So we're essentially dividing 220 by 20. which is a little bit less than 11. So if you're not being careful, you might say, well, that's bigger than 6. The answer is yes. But again, design 2 has 3 type B generators. You have to multiply that 6 by 3 to get 18. Since 18 is bigger than 11, the answer here would be no. And similar story on the third statement. If you just compare type A to type B, you might say, well, 25% of 13, that's about 3. 25%, 1/4 of 13 is about 3, a little bit bigger than 3. So you might mistakenly select yes here, comparing type A to type B, but we have to multiply the 3 in the table by 3 to account for the 3 type B generators. 9 is bigger than this number that's a little bit bigger than 3. So again, the answer here is no. So not terribly hard, but you can see how easy it is to make a mistake if you're not being careful about what's in the question, comparing designs, not comparing generators. Okay, here's the second question. This one's a little bit shorter. I'll give you about a minute, maybe a little less. Again, if you need more time, just hit the pause button. So go ahead and give this one a shot. Okay, question number 2. So I actually made a careless mistake on this one the first time I went through it. After going through the first question, I was on high alert for this whole design 2 uses 3 type B generators thing, but when I read this question, the highlighted part stuck out to me. I said, oh, now they're talking about type A generators versus type B generators. We're comparing generators themselves, not the designs. So I failed to multiply the numbers by 3. I didn't use 3 type B generators. I thought I was being clever. Turns out I was making a careless mistake. I didn't read the question carefully. I missed that part that I've underlined. It says for both power plant designs. So we are comparing designs, again, not generators. So what are they asking here? Well, type A, assuming it takes 1 hour for the startup phase at 744 kilograms per hour, that gives us 744 kilograms of pollutant Y. And we're looking for a startup phase for type B generators that would result in the same amount of emissions of pollutant Y. So type B, 203 kilograms per hour per generator. Since we have 3 of those, 609 kilograms per hour is the rate at which pollutant Y is emitted for the design 2. So how many hours will it take at a rate of 609 kilograms per hour to release 744 kilograms of this pollutant? Well, if it was 1 hour, it would be 609. So we need something a little bit bigger than 1 hour. Choice D is right there. You don't even have to do the math. It's easy enough to estimate. 1 hour would give 609 kilograms. A little bit more than 1 hour would give something close to 700. That's what we want. So the answer here is D. All right, final question for this set. I'll give you about a minute. Go ahead and give it a shot. All right, question number 3. For this one, we're asking ourselves, does this statement represent a motivation for choosing design 1 over design 2? The first statement is talking about cost to fuel per unit of power generated. So looking up at the tabs, the highlighted part, it says type A generators cost less than type B generators to fuel per unit of power generated. So if we're motivated by a desire to use the type of generator that costs less to fuel per unit of power generated, we want to go with type A generators, not type B. So we want design 1. So the answer for this one is going to be a yes. Statement 2 is talking about disposal of solid waste. Back up in the tabs, we're told that type A generators produce solid waste that is difficult and expensive to dispose of safely. Type B generators produce no solid waste. So this is actually a reason to choose design 2. If we're motivated by a desire to avoid disposing of solid waste, we want type B, we want design 2. So this is not a reason to pick design 1. The answer here is going to be no. Okay, the third one is talking about emissions of pollutant X. So the second highlighted portion in the tab here says that type B generators vent approximately half as much pollutant X compared to type A generators. So at first, again, I got caught by this whole 3 generators things. I said to myself, they're trying to catch me. It's half as much, but if there are 3 of them, that's going to be 1.5 times as much pollutant X. So I thought I was being smart by accounting for that for those 3 generators, but look carefully at the underlined portions. We're talking about per unit of power generated annually, and we know from the highlighted portion up top that each design generates the same amount of power annually. So if they're both producing the same amount of energy, and we're talking about emissions of pollutant X per unit of power generated annually, we don't need to worry about the 3 generators thing. All we know is that for however much power this power plant is producing, we're going to get half as much pollutant X if we go with type B. So this would actually be a no here. It's a reason to pick design 2, not design 1. Okay, wrapping up this set, nothing too crazy here. Maybe you got all 3 of these right, no problem. If so, you one-upped me. I missed 2 out of 3 of these the first time because I was not reading the questions carefully. I made little careless mistakes and missed questions that should have been very doable for me. So don't let that happen to you. Read the questions carefully. If you get stuck, if you start second guessing yourself or wondering, hey, wait, maybe they are talking about 3 generators or is it just 1? Just go with what you have. Don't fight it. Don't waste time going back and forth. These moments of ambiguity are going to happen. You have to just roll with it. All right, second set coming up here. Again, I'm going to give you about 1.5 minutes to go through just the tabs. After that, I'll pop the question up on the screen and give you another minute or so. And here's the first question. I'll give you another minute for that. Okay, starting with the case study, we have these Swedish taxpayers. They were given a default investing strategy. The government encouraged them to make their own choices, so most of them did. There were reports about Swedish stock prices rising rapidly, so most people invested in those stocks. Their prices fell dramatically. As a result, turns out they would have been better off sticking with the default strategy. They invested in these Swedish stocks, the prices went way down, the default strategy outperformed the Swedish stocks that fell. Okay, so for availability bias, we're asked, does the information provided clearly indicate that availability bias contributed significantly to the decisions that led to that outcome? So first of all, what is availability bias? Back on the first tab, it's when you make decisions based on recent and prominent information. For example, stock values have been rising or falling rapidly. You assume it's going to continue to do that, so you invest accordingly. And that's exactly what we described with the investors here. They saw those Swedish stock prices going up, they invested in those, ended up hurting them in the end. So this one definitely contributed significantly to the outcome described. Next one, home bias. So this is when you choose a large proportion of investment products from your home nation. So at first, really tempting, right? Yep, they invested in Swedish stocks. We're talking about Swedish taxpayers, contributed significantly. I'm out of here. But be careful. Even though they invested in Swedish stocks, why did they do that? We just talked about the reasons why. It was because those prices were rising rapidly. There's nothing in the tabs indicating that they invested in the Swedish stocks because they were Swedish. So this one's tempting, but it's actually going to be did not contribute significantly. Now, maybe this was one where you had some ambiguity, you were feeling unsure about it. Again, really important. If you're not sure, you have to make your best decision and move on. But if you read the question carefully here, it says, did home bias clearly contribute to those decisions? That's not in the tabs. The tabs say that they made this decision because of the prices, not because it was from their home country. Okay, last one here, status quo bias. So you retain investments out of inertia when it would have been rational to change those investments. That's actually not what happened here, right? They were given a default option and they changed their investments to the Swedish stocks. So maybe you're tempted by this one because of that word default. And you say, oh yeah, they were given a default, but that actually didn't contribute to the outcome. They changed the default, they changed the options from the default to the Swedish stocks. So this one's out, did not contribute significantly. Okay, question number 2. Give you another minute for this one, so give it a shot. Okay, so we know what actually happened. Taxpayers, a large portion of them invested heavily in Swedish stocks. Those prices fell dramatically, would have been better off sticking with the default. This question is giving us 3 hypothetical government actions and asking us if those actions would have been likely to produce higher portfolio values on average by 2003 for Swedish taxpayers. The first one, aggressively stimulating the national economy and thus increasing Swedish stock prices for several years. So when I read this the first time, I thought, well, it was those reports of rapidly rising stocks that caused the problem in the first place. If we aggressively stimulate the economy, that's going to make matters worse, right? What I missed was the underlying part here. For several years. So they're aggressively stimulating the national economy for several years. And the question itself is only asking about portfolio values by 2003. So if they aggressively stimulate the Swedish economy for several years, presumably those stock prices don't fall dramatically and they're in much better shape. Now, really easy to miss this one if you're not reading the questions carefully, if you miss those underlined parts. Also, Even if you saw those, you might have gotten inside your own head a bit and thought, well, for several years, what does that mean? Is it 2 years, 3 years? Is it 4 years, 5 years? Several probably means more than 3 years. But again, if you're not sure, embrace the ambiguity. What's your best guess? Do you think several includes 3 years? If so, you pick yes, you move on to the next one. Okay, statement number two, eliminating taxpayers' ability to concentrate their investments in stocks from any one country. Well, that was the problem, right? Investing heavily in only Swedish stocks. So if we weren't able to do that, probably would have been better off. So this one's a pretty easy yes. Third one, downplaying reports of rapidly rising stocks, highlighting a diverse array of stable stocks. Again, it was those reports of rapidly rising stocks that caused the problem. If we downplay those reports, maybe not so many people invest in those Swedish stocks. Maybe they have a more stable portfolio that isn't susceptible to those prices that fell dramatically. So another pretty easy yes here. Okay, third question. I'll give you a little bit less than a minute for this one. Okay, last question of the set. Which of the following, if true, would most strongly suggest that a familiarity bias influenced the initial active investment choices of most taxpayers in the case study? So not that much different than a typical reading comp question. Normally, I'd go through all 5 choices, and when you're doing these on your own, you definitely want to make sure you're using process of elimination every time. In the interest of time for this video, I'm going to skip A through D, jump right to choice E. Most taxpayers chose Swedish stocks over foreign stocks whose prices had been rising even more rapidly. So in the first question of this set, we talked about how they chose the Swedish stocks because their prices were rising rapidly, not because they were Swedish. This one says, well, there were Swedish stocks that were rising rapidly, but also other foreign stocks whose prices had been rising even more rapidly. So if it was availability bias that influenced their decisions, they should have chosen those other foreign stocks, but they chose the Swedish ones instead. That shows that home bias influenced their decisions. Home bias is a type of familiarity bias, so choice E is the one we want here. All right, here is the final set of tabs. Take a minute or so to read through these, and then I'll put the first question up. And here's the first question. Okay, so we have a prepared food business. They received negative reviews on a social media website. Meanwhile, their customer base of older professionals routinely expresses satisfaction when shopping at their business. So there's this difference between the online reviews and the in-person feedback. And for each statement, we're asked, does the information provided suggest that the statement would help explain the difference in impressions from the online reviews and the in-person feedback? So the question itself is a little tricky, suggests it would help explain. I thought that was confusing at first. Does that mean could help explain, would help explain? What does suggests it would help explain exactly mean? So embrace the ambiguity. If you're not 100% sure, you have to just keep going with what you know. So let's give it our best shot. Statement one, customer satisfaction may fall because expectations have risen. So they do mention this on the first tab. It's right there. This metric may fall simply because expectations have risen. And then on the business owner tab, they do mention expectations, but they talk about differing expectations, different expectations between the younger and less affluent reviewers and the customer base of older professionals. So you might be tempted by this one because they do mention expectations, but they talk about a difference in expectations, not rising expectations. So this one's going to be a no. Second statement, people often cease patronizing a business with which they are dissatisfied. So at first I thought, well, maybe, but how do I know whether this actually happened at this specific prepared food business? But look back at the question. What I've underlined is the assuming each of the following statements is true part. So we have to assume this is true, that people often do cease patronizing a business with which they are dissatisfied. So this probably would apply to the online reviewers. Also, it asks, does the information provided suggest that this statement would help explain? It doesn't have to be 100% sure, but based on what's in the tabs, this would explain why the online reviewers are no longer patronizing this business and why you get a discrepancy between the in-person customers and the online reviewers. So this one is going to be a yes. Third statement, contented customers often do not seize an opportunity to vent their opinions. So like the second one, I at first thought, I'm not sure if this applies to this specific situation, this specific business, but going back to the underlying parts, assuming this is true, this would help explain why the older professionals who are satisfied wouldn't seize an opportunity to express their opinion online, whereas the negative reviewers who are dissatisfied would seize that opportunity. So even though it's not a 100% sure thing, the information in the tabs does suggest that this would help explain the difference in impressions. So this is going to be a yes as well. All right, here's question number 2. I'll give you another minute for this one. Okay, this question gives us 3 different survey strategies, and for each one, we have to answer the question, does the information in the tabs suggest that such a survey would make it easier for the prepared food business to identify overall satisfaction among its customer base than did the social media reviews? So I've underlined here the among its customer base part. If you don't pick up on that and process that fully, this question can be really tough, but we're only interested in overall satisfaction among the base. So if you look at the first statement, including survey questions to identify specific groups of customers and analyzing reported levels of satisfaction within each of those groups, well, that's exactly what we need. Back up in the tabs, the problem with the online reviews is that such reviewers are usually anonymous, so it's hard to know to what extent their opinions reflect the majority. If we have these survey questions to identify the groups, then we'll know whether we're talking about our customer base or people who are outside of our customer base. So this is exactly what we need. This one would make it easier for the business. This one's going to be a yes. Statement 2, offering discounted prices to customers who complete online surveys. So this one, I at first thought, well, maybe if they offer discounted prices, these reviewers will be less dissatisfied, they'll be a little happier, maybe less reluctant to leave a bad review, but it doesn't solve the problem. We still have no idea whether we're getting reviews from our customer base or from random fringe groups of our customers. So this one's actually not going to help. This is going to be a no. Statement 3, giving the least weight to the reports of very high and very low customer satisfaction, and the most weight to reports of moderate satisfaction. So essentially, this is going to weed out the opinions on the fringes, people who are very satisfied, people who are very unsatisfied, leaving us with what's in the middle. But does that tell us anything about our customer base? Again, that among its customer base part is critical here. That's why you need to read this question carefully. This doesn't help us. This eliminates some outliers, but it doesn't tell us anything about the overall satisfaction of our customer base. So this one's a no as well. Okay, final question. Give it a shot, and I'll be back in a minute. All right, last question, home stretch. Based on the information provided, if a business gathered only anonymous feedback on customer satisfaction, that business would most clearly have difficulty with which of the following? So the wording of the question itself, not too tricky here, but you still have to be really careful reading the answer choices themselves. Make sure you're processing them exactly as they're written. So choice A, determining what types of complaints are most typical among the respondents. Well, the feedback is anonymous, but the complaints are the complaints. So there should be no trouble in determining what types of complaints are the most typical among respondents. So A is out. Choice B, detecting trends in the business's level of customer satisfaction. Well, again, just because the feedback is anonymous doesn't mean we should have any trouble detecting trends in customer satisfaction. In fact, on the Survey Difficulties tab, it even says that surveys can be useful. In particular, resurveying over time can reveal trends in customer satisfaction. So despite the disadvantages to surveys described in this tab, it's still possible to detect trends in customer satisfaction. So B's out as well. Okay, choice C, determining which customer complaints it would be most beneficial to address. So this one's tricky. We are told in the business owner tab that there's a problem when the reviews are anonymous because we have a hard time knowing to what extent the reviews reflect the majority. So if we don't know if their opinions reflect the majority, we're not sure if we should react to those reviews. That was the whole kind of conclusion of this business owner tab. You don't want to overreact to these negative reviews. Maybe they don't reflect the majority. So C is another way of saying that. If we're not sure whether these opinions reflect the majority, then it can be hard to tell if we should actually address those concerns, react to those reviews. So let's leave C and see what else we have. Okay, choice D, determining how to define customer satisfaction. Well, defining customer satisfaction has nothing to do with the survey results themselves, so this one doesn't matter. D is out. Okay, choice E, differentiating itself from competitors. Well, your customer satisfaction survey results have nothing to do with how you're actually going to differentiate yourself from your competitors. So having anonymous feedback wouldn't affect this one way or the other. You're still going to have to figure out how to differentiate yourself from competitors, regardless of whether the reviews are anonymous or not. So E's out, and C is our best answer. All right, you made it. 9 multi-source reasoning questions, that's a lot. The good news is that based on what we know from GMAT and the practice tests, you're only likely to get 1, maybe 2 sets of these questions on an actual test. So if you're feeling pretty beat right now, don't worry too much about it. Couple key takeaways. These questions are hard. There's a lot to get through in the tabs. The questions themselves can be very confusing. So do yourself a favor and read those questions carefully every time. It's not going to be a magical fix. It's not going to suddenly make the test easier for you, but hopefully it'll help you reduce the number of careless mistakes you're making. That said, even if you do that, you will get stumped sometimes. You'll feel like things are confusing, ambiguous. It's going to happen. It happens to GMAT tutors who have 99th percentile test scores and who are acing the data insight sections on the practice tests. So that's why I wanted to show you a handful of questions that I struggled with. Even someone who does well on this stuff will struggle. You should expect to struggle yourself when it happens. Embrace it. You don't need to get every single question right to get a great score. Make your best guess. Move on to the next one. All right, that's all for today. I'm Mike with GMAT Ninja. Thank you for watching.